Thank you so much. And thanks to our panel just now. Really appreciated the conversation. I am delighted. We have with us 3 conversationalists today who have generated outsized impacts in their areas of influence. Ladies, can you turn on your cameras, please? We have Karina Litvack calling in from London, Tanah Sullivan, and Dato Dr. Hartini Zainudin. Welcome, ladies. So nice to see you all here.
Hi.
They are the perfect guides to talk to us about how equitable transitions can be achieved for societies and communities. They're also going to touch on the role of businesses and activists, how activists can elevate their influence. So let's get started. Please put your questions into the Q&A box and we will get to it if we feel like it and if we have the time. Each of you have forged ahead with incredibly important causes which have been very close to your hearts. Could we start off by each of you telling us how you personally reimagine leadership when it comes to equitable transition and outcomes? I'd like to invite Karina to start with, and then Tanah, and then Dato Dr. Hartini, please. Over to you, ladies.
Thank you so much, Sunita, and thank you to the organizers for hosting us today. You know, I was very struck by some of the comments that both Amy and Rupal made earlier today. In particular, when Amy noted the parallels between climate action and DEI and how we've been overly, focused on each of these 2 areas without looking at them in a holistic and joined up way, which I thought was very, very insightful, because they do present similar challenges and a lot of the measures are very similar. So I think to me, what really jumps out, and this has been especially come into focus in the last year in one of my boards, which is the board of ENI, the oil and gas major, as we have really ramped up our focus on the just and equitable transition. And, you know, it brings up all sorts of questions which are absolutely reminiscent of the same discussions that we had only a month before when we did a deep dive into DEI. And it boils down to this: we need to look at commercial priorities in a very different way, or put otherwise, the pushback that one gets, that I get, that my colleagues get, is, oh, but that's not commercially viable, or oh, but we're a commercial organization, oh, but we have shareholders that we need to please. And what you're proposing goes directly against that. And of course, in fact, what we really need to do is to think differently about what is commercially viable. Because if something is not sustainable from a climatic perspective and from an equity perspective, which of course includes gender, indigenous people, people of different ethnicities, people of different sexual identities and orientations, then it cannot be commercially sustainable. It ultimately comes back to bite you. And, just last week, Bloomberg published a very long expose on how one of the largest oil and gas companies, which I will not name out of politeness, that is well known for its complete resistance to embracing the climate challenge, has started to hemorrhage people. It's starting to hemorrhage people at a rate that is interfering with its ability to hold on to good talent and to function and to remain competitive. So it took a while. I remember when I was an investor asking this company that very question and having that question dismissed, because we always get the best people because we are the best company in the business. Well, okay, so it took 20 years, but now it's really costly. And to repair that is not something you can do overnight. So we all have to take lessons from that and think about what is commercial and what is going to make our companies competitive in what we call the employer branding proposition. We're in a world now where post-pandemic people are quitting because they're questioning their priorities, and holding on to talent is a key consideration for success. So DEI has to be a part of that because people must feel included and valued for all aspects of who they are and what they bring to their job. And dare I say it, in this article about this one oil major, one of the very salient reasons for employees shunning this company, existing employees and prospective employees, is its attitude to the climate challenge, and the fact that anybody who spoke out and raised doubts was sidelined and punished in their promotion prospects. So, if we think about if we turn the question now back to women specifically, and I know that we're here to talk about gender, but not just gender, I think all of us who have worked very hard to build more gender balance, and who have ourselves as a gender that's underrepresented, we've had this experience of being the disturbers, of being the ones who in order to achieve success, are accustomed to taking a few knocks along the way. And that same disposition, that same sort of psychological and moral strength and courage is also what animates us when we fly the flag for a more holistic approach to climate transition strategy. So, wrapping it all up together, it's about cognitive diversity, and a core part of cognitive diversity is bringing in the other gender, as well as the other underrepresented people in the leadership of the company. So to sum it up in one sentence, reimagining leadership to me is about being morally brave, about having a thick skin sometimes when it's necessary, and being shrewd about bringing others along rather than bullying them into submission, which is often the recipe for success for many traditional leaders. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work when you're really trying to change culture. Thank you, Sunita.
And maybe I think I'll go next. I'll just jump in to keep this as informal as possible. I think, look, for those who are not familiar, I am the head of sustainability of GoTo Group, and we're a tech company in Indonesia, one of the largest digital ecosystems. By our very nature, we are inclusive in the sense that we've provided access to the digital economy for around 14 million micro SMEs in this country. In Indonesia, we contribute around 2% of the country's GDP. We have almost 3 million active driver partners. A very small percentage of those are female driver partners, but we're working on that as well. I think, look, the fact that we're in a very multicultural, multi-ethnic, we're operating in a very multicultural, multi-ethnic country, which is home for us. By that very point alone, I think we've kind of built this business, built our ecosystem to ensure we're as inclusive as possible, and that we're reducing and eventually eliminating barriers to growth and opportunity, both for our partners, the millions of merchants and drivers in our ecosystem, but also internally for our employees and leadership as well. When I did come into the company 2 years ago as the first head of sustainability, for me, it covered diversity and inclusion. And I think when I really thought, well, what else is there to cover? Because, we're not a US company. I came from the, government in Canada and Australia, where there was a real diversity problem. But in Indonesia, I thought it was pretty much set. Like, what else are we? We're all different versions of minorities here. But it was so, and to Karina's point, right? We didn't have cognitive diversity. I realized we didn't have necessarily gender parity in the functions and areas where it mattered, meaning, for me, it was like looking at our leadership team and seeing that most of them were kind of cut from the same cloth, or that they went to the same schools, or grew up in the same kinds of environments. And then on top of that, we kind of had low gender representation at a leadership and technical function standpoint, not as a company as a whole, but in these specific areas. And so that's where, for me, reimagining leadership in this space, especially as within my mandate, it's to drive kind of meaningful and credible climate action, not just for our company, but also for our ecosystem and the millions of partners in it. It's, for me, one was actually recognizing that there's a problem and there's a gap. And actually that took me a lot longer than I anticipated to do. If you are going out there and saying you believe in gender equality and you want to achieve gender parity in your company, you better be damn sure that you're paying your female employees the same as your male. You better be willing to show and disclose that as well. And it's why it's taken me a while to get here, but we are undergoing our first ever gender pay audit as a company. The second one is around representation. You better be ready to show how you're going to promote and support women getting into leadership roles. How you are looking at the widest part of your talent recruitment pipeline to ensure that more and more women are going into the technical roles as well and functions. Because it's just not good enough. I mean, I am so frustrated we're still having these conversations. I'm so frustrated we still have to highlight these as specific sessions and the thing is that, and I'm sorry, a lot of my male colleagues just, when I came in talking about this stuff, they didn't think there was a problem. They still don't think it's a problem. It's insane. So, I come at it from a very tech perspective. These are all tech people that I work with. And so, let's let the data show. Let's see what our pay audit says. let's start there. Let's close that gap first. That's the most important part, and then work from there. And then overall, as an ecosystem and how we're managing and approaching kind of climate action, I mean, this isn't rocket science, right? For us, it's whatever we do from an energy efficient, from a transition over to renewable energy, to ensuring that the solutions, whether they are in app or offline solutions for our millions of merchants and driver partners, that they are as inclusive and accessible as possible. We're at the forefront here in Indonesia of electric mobility. It's almost 90% of our entire emissions inventory, the mobility happening on our platform, which is insane. But because of that, we've had to invest millions of dollars into helping to support our driver partners shift over to electric mobility. And then on top of that, work with the state grid to ensure that even the charging and swapping stations that are powering those batteries are renewable energy powered as well. There's a premium for that. So far this year, we've been able to cover that premium to ensure that it's an option that's as accessible to our partners and to our company as well, with all of the workplaces we have across the country. But it's for me, it's not happening fast enough, but I hope that, we can continue to work on this overall and consider all of the stakeholders we have in our ecosystem, because they are equally, if not more important, as it relates to how we transition to carbon neutral operations as a company and as an ecosystem. And the only way we're going to be able to accelerate a lot of that progress is by having the kind of cognitive diversity that's largely been lacking so far. So I will continue to be the nagging voice that in the company and across the landscape here, if I have to be. I'm happy to wear that hat, because it's for something that's very, very important, not just to me, but for the entire organization. And so very proud to be able to nag my way to the top if I need to make sure we get to a point where we can all be proud of and everybody is equally able to access all these opportunities to help transition themselves also towards carbon neutrality. I will stop there. I've waffled on too much. Teeny, over to you.
Thank you so much. I think I come from a slightly different perspective, although I think the philosophy and principle behind it is the same. The people who know me as a child activist working in the humanitarian space, but my day job is as a fundraising and resource mobilization person, who is now also leading the National Recovery Council on Food Security, where I work with very, very marginalized groups. And of course, 80% of all those asking for help and need are the women, because they happen to be the head of most of the households that I work with, single mothers, etc. Husbands have moved or left with many, many children and mouths to feed. So for me, looking at this transitional leadership is very much on two different levels. One is to persuade corporates to come in and work with me on food security, and at the same time understanding that we need to include all these marginalized groups as well, of which many are women. And on one hand, we have, it's funny, I gave 2 talks the last couple of days, one on sustainable cities and another one on urban poverty. And in both things, I'm going, DEI, not as a goal, but as a process, and that we need to include bringing marginalized groups into the table, which most are women, and having them in leadership positions, because naturally these women will know where the crisis is, where the issues are, and what needs to get fixed. And 2, they're also the ones who are most vulnerable, because they need the empowerment, role models, and know-hows to be able to sustain and to hold whatever crises and issues are there, and trying to fix it at the same time. So there are multiple levels in which I think when we talk about transitional leadership, we need to address. One is to include them as marginalized groups. One is to ensure that we empower the women that we're working with in issues that affect all of us. And I guess that the other one is also to ensure that, as we talk to corporates, coming from the humanitarian background, that everybody understands that we have to include everybody. And we still have an issue. It's not just about gender, but just including everybody at the table when we're discussing any social issue or social protection issue that affects corporates as well as the communities that work around them. So I think there's a lot. It's exciting at the same time. It's a little scary because there are policies in place, unfortunately, in Malaysia that will still exclude women and girls, and will definitely exclude marginalized groups. So how do we sort of retain and sustain the messaging? How do we retain and sustain and empower these groups to sort of take on the role of leaders? Because even if they are natural leaders, the point is that we need to ensure that we keep them going, and either having corporate leaders, women leaders as role models, or making sure that they're included, checking with them, making sure. So I think there's lots of rooms to be able to do everything. And as continue this journey personally on food security and looking at climate change and carbon footprints, which I'm actually just reading books at the moment, trying to learn from everybody. It's also being aware and being and understanding that there's a responsibility to ensure that we help as many women and girls in the process in Malaysia as well. So yeah, over to you, Sunita.
Tini, I love the work that you've been doing, that, and you've been doing fabulous work for so many years. But you're right. What I'm hearing from our conversationalists is that women have tremendous resilience. I love how strong women are animated when they fly the flag, as Karina said. And remember, once goodwill or trust is lost, it can take a long time to rebuild. So it's really worthwhile for businesses to take this very, very seriously. So let's pivot to the next question. Changing the mindsets of leaders and boards. What levers need to be activated or strengthened? For example, aligning numbers is an important part of steering the direction of travel. How do each of you create that culture of accountability and governance within businesses? Karina, Tanah, and then Tini. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I mean, the funny thing is that my biggest board is a very it's a bunch of engineers, and so numbers are always the dominant approach to anything. And so the fact that there has been such a tremendous focus on the soft stuff, the work on culture, and the CEO rather, doing so much advocacy to staff and modeling behaviors by CEO and top managers in terms of how they themselves, kind of empower women and minorities and so forth, messaging, mentoring, all of that stuff has been a huge effort and something that's been very visible. But in fact, where we still have work to do is on the stuff that should be familiar, which is introducing ways of quantifying this stuff, because it's interesting that the 30% Club has a number in its name. And so we all are very clear about what the goal has been all this time. And now that we're approaching it, we're thinking in terms of lifting that goal. Whereas in fact, in my personal experience at any rate, certainly in a non-UK or non-US context, where the concept of numerical targets around these issues is much less of a comfortable discussion. That's not something that we do. We measure retrospectively, but actually saying out loud, oh, we want to get to X percent, is not something that at least has reached me sitting in the board. Whether it's being discussed informally in the trenches is a different matter. But when I pick it up, we're not ready for that. And I actually think that unless you do that, and we've seen that with the 30% club, you're missing one very important lever. And of course, the usual objection, you've all heard it, is we don't want to compromise competence. We don't want, we always pick the best person. Well, yeah, but you must be missing something if half the population is not represented. How can you be getting the best people if you don't have adequate representation across all the people who are here? So in the case of a global multinational, it won't just be gender, it'll also be nationalities. And, it's often the case in companies that the very top echelons and a couple of echelons below are all from the same home country. And that's something that needs to change, not just because of equity, but because of showing, that there are prospects for professional success, no matter where you come from. I mean, every individual in the company should have a realistic chance of becoming CEO. And if that's closed off, you're guaranteed that you're going to, shed those people along the way. And maybe they'll go and do great things in their home government or something, but you will lose them. So, and then the other thing I think that is very, very important, and RuPaul mentioned it, was the fact that we need the people who are in the majority. In our case, it's white men. In my own company, it's Italian white men, to be the ones to advocate for this. I'm not sure I agree that they don't feel empowered to do it. I don't think any of these people feel that they ever lack an opportunity to speak up on anything they want to say. I think it's a deeper problem than that. And it goes to the point that I think she had made regarding a study that revealed that when women and people of color speak out about diversity, it automatically calls into question their professional competence. And that does not happen when, in our case, white men are the ones making those points. And what that's done, certainly in the climate governance movement that I personally chair, is prompted us to say, we need to get more men. We need to get more men to fly the flag for us, because if this becomes perceived as a women's thing, it's going to be marginalized just like everything else. And that's a pretty sad statement, isn't it? But there are lots of reasons why we need to enlist the men and the people who are in the positions of, shall we say, in the majority, to drive this agenda. Thank you.
So maybe my response, following that very, very hard act to follow, Karina, I'll try and be as concise and articulate as you were. Look, I think for our organization, at least, how we're holding, or how we're reimagining leadership in this space and holding the leaders accountable. We actually have an incentive scheme set up for leaders as it relates to climate-related targets that we have, but not just that, broader ESG goals as well, of which diversity and inclusion is included. You know what? You want your bonus this year? You have to meet your targets. And so and this is just the same as we treat it the same as any financial or growth targets we set for the business units. We actually have 3 companies in our group, all within my scope as it relates to ESG. So environmental, social, and governance performance. And so we've really, I'm part of the risk management committee. I'm part of the audit committee. I, make sure that so there's a channel for us to be able to every quarter escalate and update our board of commissioners, our board of directors on ESG related risks, opportunities. And they actually sign off on all of the priorities we set prior to the year prior. And then allocate a meaningful budget to shifting our operations to be more sustainable. That include, and our policies and our processes, the whole thing. I think I don't want to generalize genders, but I think it is actually because we are women in a lot of these cases that we're able to think about all these things very comprehensively and holistically. You know, this concept of leaving no one behind for me rings so incredibly true. Everything that gets tabled at any of these board meetings or these committee meetings internally, you know, at a senior leadership level, it's, you know, I'm always coming at it from all these different, considering all these different perspectives, not just because I'm an intersection of all these. I am a woman of color. I am a mom, you know, a working mom. I am, you know, this and that. I'm a daughter. I'm all these other identities that you know, I hold very dear to my core. You know, I'm the same person at work as I am at home. So for me, it's incredibly personal what I do in my job, and that's why I'm so passionate and strongly championing a lot of these principles, because the cognitive diversity aspect for me is incredibly important, us being able to credibly and meaningfully respond to our climate related efforts, but also more broadly our social aspects as well. We have millions of micro SMEs, a lot of them female owned businesses in this country that rely on our platform for their livelihoods. We have a lot of millions of driver partners whose sole income comes from, you know, the orders and transactions happening on our platform. And so it's an incredible responsibility to bear. So for me, it's not, rather than spitting out these data points every year around how incredibly crazy and sexy our growth is, although tech companies right now in this environment are not doing so well, but I'll leave that for another conversation. But look, I think we have a responsibility to ensure that whatever we do, we are, you know, monitoring the right data. We are sharing and disclosing our progress in a transparent way. It makes us way more accountable than not doing so. Whether, you know, and not just looking at everything through rose-colored glasses, and meaning that even if things aren't going so well, that we share those kinds of lessons and insights with even our competitors. I think it's a net positive for everybody to be collectively moving towards decarbonization, especially in a country like Indonesia, which is incredibly vulnerable to climate-related risk and issues. And so, you know, I'm very proud and excited to be part of this collective kind of movement. Most of them are women, by the way. Most of my peers in other companies are women here. So I think that's a testament to our strength and our persistence and our capability of being able to think about this from a very equitable and inclusive perspective, and ensure that, yeah, no one gets left behind, and that we're holding even our male peers and our male leaders, predominantly male leaders, unfortunately that's the case, most of the CEOs are still male, that we're holding them accountable to the commitments that we've made and the targets that we've set for ourselves. And nothing speaks louder than money. So the incentive team, I will tell you, it works very well.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I'm listening to both of you and I'm thinking, oh, how do I get you to come sit down with the women I work with in those marginalized communities? You know, for me, like I said, the biggest question I have is how to get women from the communities to sit down with women, you know, in leadership roles in corporates, sit down and work on an issue together. The first one happens to be food, the next one will be health, the third will be livelihoods, the fourth will be education. But how do we get women and leaders from different groups, actually all happen to be women in the marginalized groups, most of them actually, and speak a common language. And for me, you know, we have to go back to basic, and the basic is that everybody has to agree to the terms and conditions. Everybody has to agree on moving together as a collective. Collective impact models are, for us, the easiest to use, simply because we all have pillars, everybody agrees on them, everybody agrees to the terms, everybody believes, you know, agrees to, you know, how fast we're going to move, how quickly we're going to move, what the goals and objectives are, and how we're going to get there. So, you know, as long as we have clear definitions, clear languages, and agree on common goals, I think that's one way to bring the women from different groups together. But again, like I said, DEI for me is a process. It's not the end goal, because we're talking about transitional leadership. And at the end of the day, I'm going to be frank, I don't think CEOs are the only kinds of leaders that are going to lead the country. I think community leaders are also going to have a part to play in that. And you don't have to be a CEO to be a leader. You can be a leader within the communities themselves and do just as impactful as others. So I think it's very important to also not look at leadership as a top-down kind of role, but sort of a bottoms-up level, level edging, whatever the word is, coming together because you want to fix something. So for me, I wouldn't tell a young girl from a small village that, being the CEO is the end all be all, but being a community leader and making the change is just as important as being the CEO working on the same issue. So I think those are the kind of levers I'm looking at. But like I said, I'm from a different perspective. It's how do I get these different groups to come together, agree on something and move together as a collective, as a movement.
Excellent. I love that. I fully agree. Women and national leaders starting at home in the household, strongly championing the principles that are important, the values frameworks that are important to us. So my last and final question, before I invite each of you to share your closing remarks with us, the definition of development is access to opportunities. How can the leadership distinguish between pursuing equal opportunities versus equal representation, which might need a quota or a mandate? How do you alter incentives to encourage businesses to be good citizens and to be part of the ecosystem of solutions? Karina, Tanah, and Tini, what are your thoughts?
Okay, I have two observations to make on that. How many times, including a very, very high profile one in Malaysia that I had the pleasure of reading in the gossip papers recently, how many times here it said, oh, he was just such a fantastic producer that everybody looked the other way, but everybody knew that he was engaging in abusive, bullying, toxic, sexual harassment, all of those things, all of those behaviors. And yet we see it again and again. Good producers are given a pass. And so if we're talking, and Tanah mentioned it earlier in the context of incentives, if you behave in this unacceptable way, in the early signs, you don't get your bonus. And if it persists, you're out of a job. Now, what that also means is that your competitors will happily snap you up. But we just have to it goes back to that point about moral courage and investing in the long-term attractiveness of our corporate culture. Do we really want to be persistently turning a blind eye to behavior that is completely contrary to our values because he's a great producer? So that's my first point. And then the second point is, in relation to the absolutely well-reasoned question about how do we move from representation to actual equality of opportunity and therefore outcomes. I think it's going to be a little bit of a bumpy road. I serve on a board in a country that introduced quotas. And so my year, when I joined my board 8 years ago, was the first year that the quotas were a deadline as opposed to voluntary. And so we went from 0 women on the board to a third on the board. And yes, of course, you're going to have circumstances where some of the female appointees are not necessarily of the caliber that it would expect. And yes, that does a disservice to the whole movement and so forth. But I would like to ask you this. How many incompetent white men are holding those positions? I think when we get to a point of equality of incompetence, right, to equality of people rising to the level of their incompetence across genders, ethnicities, sexual identities, etc., then we can say that we've truly achieved equality of opportunity. But until we get there, there are going to be hiccups. And we are going to occasionally put people in positions that maybe wouldn't have been there if it hadn't been for. And that's something we just have to accept because we certainly don't have perfection today anyway.
I don't know that I have anything meaningful to add to that. That kind of summed up also what I wanted to share. No, look, look, in our context, it's been a really bumpy road so far. You don't see these gray hairs in the Zoom. There's a lot. I'm only 16 years old, and look how old and weathered I am. I'm definitely not 16, nor do I want to go back to 16. Look, I think it's been a really bumpy road for us, and we still have a long, long way to go. I've been in conversations and meetings, even with our investors, right, where I'm being introduced, as the chief of sustainability, and and they'll make a comment about the way I look, or what I'm, yeah, it still happens. I mean, it happens when I'm on panels and in person, and questions come up, and comments come up, and I think we were so used to kind of smiling in meeting rooms and boardrooms and in panel sessions, and because we don't want to make other people uncomfortable. I personally have been, I think throughout my childhood, have been brought up to know how to make other people comfortable, right, and other people feel safe, and if that means making myself smaller in a way, or making myself softer in a way, then that's what I have to do to get things done, because that's a smart way of getting things done. And now I refuse to do that anymore. I in fact, doing that only harms other women as well. It keeps other women behind and down at the same time, because what you're doing is just perpetuating a terrible behavior a lot of us have developed over years, and it's not good enough anymore. So if it means that he is uncomfortable, and he, he's not, and now my response is, I'm sorry, I don't think you're here for a professional meeting, and if that's the case, then I'll leave. I'm leaving. We don't need to have this conversation. I mean, it makes them really uncomfortable, but it's something that needs to be called out, I think. And also to the point around male allies, it should be my male peers also, making a point about that is not acceptable kind of comments or behavior to have. But yeah, I think these are the small, they seemingly small, but they can make mountains of difference in the long run for a lot of us, and making sure that we are instilling the right values across our organization. I talk a lot about, I mean, every single one of us has a story. I mean, isn't this tragic? A lot has a story about being in an uncomfortable situation with a male boss, a male colleague, a male friend, whatever, you name it. Males in general. Why did my mom have to teach me to cross the street when a man was walking on the other side, or how to walk or go for a run with my keys, as a protective mechanism? So young girls are still being taught these things. It's us that needs to protect ourselves, versus it's actually the male behavior that needs to change. And I think, it's getting very far. I'm digressing away from the climate points, but look, I apply this same principle to how I prepare, kind of how our company responds to climate action, how our company responds to social inequality, to wealth disparity, to proper governance structures as an organization. We have to make this space safe, and engaging, but everybody has to be valued and has access to the same opportunities. I don't need equal opportunities I don't want to be identified anymore as a great female leader. I just want to be a great leader, full stop. Why are we still talking about that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tanah. Thank you so much. Tini, what are your thoughts?
I have to go after Karina and Tanah. I don't know.
I'm so sorry, but you know what? You can kick off closing remarks.
I think what's missing here is moral leadership. It doesn't matter if you're male or female, although I think women have a better opportunity now because we're in a position of leadership, because we're in positions of being able to speak up and speak out, and that we must speak up and speak out, that we should handhold, that we should support one another, that there is plenty of room for all of us to get to the top, that we have to look at different kinds of leaders from the community as well. So it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I think what's lacking is moral leadership and courage to be able to speak up when something is wrong. And who cares what others say, whether it's men or women. That is what's missing. And that's the reason why I think so many of the issues and problems in the world are existing, simply because we lack that moral leadership, and we lack that listening power, and we lack that support for one another. So that's what I would say. So yeah, I get to go first. So I said that. Next.
No, hold on. I think this has been such a fabulous session. I'm so grateful to all three of you. I just want to recap before I invite each of you to then give your closing remarks. What are the things that you really want everyone to take away? Karina, you have said that look at commercial opportunities in a different way, and how many incompetent incumbents are holding positions right now. And Tanah, what I loved was let the data show, for example, with gender pay audits, and you emphasize women are able to think comprehensively and holistically. And Tini, I loved what you said about supporting one another, have common goals, speak a common language. So what are your closing remarks, Tini, Tanah, and Karina?
I already gave my closing remarks.
Oh, that was it. Okay, Tanah.
I'm just reading some of the comments here about the Bro Club.
The Bro Club.
There's also something called the Tech Bros. I don't know if actually I think The Economist or something had an article recently about it. It's so true. I mean, but very, you know, I need to, because I have so much to say about this stuff. But I have so much to say, not enough time. I will continue doing what I need to do to I think as a company, to hold the leaders in our company accountable, and making sure that as we are progressing on our environmental goals, as we are progressing on our social commitments, as we're progressing on all the other things that we're doing within a sustainable climate and broader sustainability context, that we do so with complete, inclusion at its core, at the core, right? Because if it doesn't serve and if it doesn't serve and benefit our entire ecosystem, then for us, it doesn't make sense. And so even just embedding kind of sustainability at every kind of business strategy meeting, every budget planning meeting. I work very closely with the CFO. I work very closely with our, head of strategy. I work very closely with all of the business unit leaders. I have to be that nagging, persistent voice because until they get it organically, I won't stop. And so I think because everything that we do from a sustainability standpoint has to be in step and in line with what all the business targets and business direction setting conversations and planning we're having. So unless it's there, then it's not meaningful for me. And so I think this is something that's incredibly important from an organizational standpoint anyway. And individually, of course, keep up the work. Keep on harping, don't be afraid to make people uncomfortable as it relates to this, because you're really paving a path for others to follow as well.
Me? Okay. Do you know, when I was 21, so 10 years ago, I had a really unpleasant, memorable experience. I was bullied at work by a senior woman. And I said to myself at the time, when I grow up and I am, a very, very senior woman, I will always be kind, and I will always be kind on my way to getting there. I never want to be that person who steps on throats as a way to reach success, right? And I did that for 30 years. And for 30 years, I made a point of being friends with everybody and being liked by everybody. And I got to a point of a certain level of seniority where I could not get listened to, until one day I put my foot down and I said, I'm refusing to sign on this particular thing because you're not listening to me. And it was like an earthquake. And suddenly everybody did what they were supposed to do because I was horrible. And it made me very, very sad that it took my being horrible to get the result that I had tried for literally 2 years by being sweet and kind and polite and respectful to get. And so I had to revisit, what is it that is going to get me where I want to go? And I thought, okay, I'm still going to be a kind and decent person. I'm never going to step on throats to get to where I want to get to, but I am going to have to make peace with the fact that people might not always like me. And I think if there's one lesson that we could impart, especially to little girls, is it's okay not to be liked sometimes if you know that you're right and everybody else is wrong. And so I think, yeah, let's accept that sometimes sometimes we won't be popular, and that's okay.
Thank you. That's gold, Karina. Thank you so much for sharing this. I think we've all been there before in some way or another. As I come from a climate background, I want to remind everyone, you cannot buy well-being in a crisis. I heard this from a youth leader last week. And what these women leaders have clearly demonstrated is that they care about diversity, equity, they care about the climate emergency because they care about the person next to them. So, Karina, Tanah, Tini, thank you so much for your time. Back to the moderator. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you to all our amazing moderators this afternoon and our esteemed conversationalists. We hope you've enjoyed these all important and timely conversations. At this juncture, we'd also like to thank our event partners, the Securities Commission, Bursa Malaysia, the Minority Shareholders Watch Group, MSWG, the Institute of Corporate Directors Malaysia, ICDM, and Climate Governance. Thank you all so much for taking time off your busy schedules to join us. Now, if you're keen to follow the 30% Club Malaysia, please look us up on LinkedIn for regular updates. And if you're a corporation keen to pursue DEI, please get in touch with us to become a corporate advocate. To all observing the upcoming Festival of Lights, happy Deepavali to you and to all at home. Thank you and have a pleasant evening ahead.